Well, hi and welcome everybody to the first event of our year-long 10th anniversary celebration. So thankful that you all could make it. Tonight, we're going to be talking about going big with big adventures, big ideas, and doing things that are bigger than ourselves. While there's still, of course, a lot of people around the world that are in this really difficult pandemic, thankfully here in the US and many other places, things are starting to look better. And like a lot of people, you might be coming out of this past year with a newfound drive to take on that bucket list thing, to go for something big, to go for that big life change or give back to others, whatever that might be for you. Tonight, we're joined by 4 explorers who embody that spirit of going big for things, going for big things now. We hope that they're going to leave you inspired, and we know that you'll have fun listening to their stories. Before we get started, just a few quick guidelines for what's going to take place tonight. We will be doing a Q&A at the end. So if you have questions as we go, just put them in the Q&A chat and we'll get to them at the end. Tonight, we're going to hear from the 4 explorers I mentioned. The first will be Alan Eustace. Alan is a stratosphere jump record holder and part of the Adventure Scientists Advisory Council. Julie Hotz, Hotz, I got it right, is a filmmaker and photographer who unexpectedly started doing America's greatest through heights while getting to her starting points by human power. She's volunteered to collect data for our microplastics and wildlife connectivity projects. Hari Mix is a Santa Clara University geochemist who studies the interactions between different parts of the Earth system, from plate tectonics to climate and life. He's an avid alpinist, and Hari has summited some of the world's highest peaks and has collected data for our Snow and Ice project, as well as our Pika project. He's currently gearing up to traverse the Himalaya. Ashlee Earl is a research scientist who is one of our partners on our antibiotic resistance project, about how antibiotic resistance is an impending crisis that could dwarf our current pandemic. It could kill 10 million people a year by the year 2050, and why she decided to take on one of the biggest issues in public health and ask big questions that are needed from global data. So I'm super, super excited tonight to have all of these guests. Before we jump into their speeches, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and just give you a quick introduction to the organization and just give you a little bit of our history. So, all right, so telling me it's not working, so I'm going to try that one more time. All right, I should be able to see it. So as I was on my own adventures trekking around the world, seeing some of the most remote places on Earth, I consistently saw 2 things. One was that there were pretty clear signs of environmental degradation all around. And the second was that it was more of a feeling. It was that I consistently felt very selfish for being out there and doing nothing beneficial for the world. I had trekked the length of South America and been all around the planet and desperately wanted to find a way to give back to these places. So when I moved to Montana and started working in wildlife ecology, tracking wolverines, lynx, grizzly bears, I went to California and worked with spotted owls for a while. And so quickly I felt fulfilled. I felt like I was able to use my outdoor skill set and make a tremendous difference for the species and places that I was working with. But what I realized pretty quickly was that the impact I was having was minimal. And that if I could figure out a way to mobilize the tens of thousands of people who are playing in the outdoors every day, who want also to give back, who have shared that same selfish feeling with me, that there would be so much more impact. And so 10 years ago, I Googled, how do you start a nonprofit? And that was literally how this thing got started. I learned a lot from that initial Google. But in the last 10 years, in the 10 years that followed, I never imagined that I would learn some of the things that I have. And more importantly, I never imagined that we would be able to have the impact that we've had in such a short period of time. We've worked across sectors, from antibiotic resistance with Ashlee, who you'll hear tonight, and Mike Gilmore, her partner, on that project, to illegal deforestation, working on an issue that affects billions of people around the globe, $150 billion a year being stolen out of forests. And we're creating genetic and chemical reference libraries that will allow for prosecutions of timber thefts. To wildlife connectivity, making it easier for wildlife to move across roadways, to agriculture, collecting the highest known plant life on Earth from Mount Everest, which is being used to inoculate millions of acres each year now, to microplastics, collecting the largest data set on Earth for microplastics, and to working with threatened species, helping to restore them and protect them around the globe. So this has been one of the greatest experiences of my life and one of the biggest challenges as well. And it took thinking big. In the beginning of this, again, with very little experience, I had no idea what I was getting into, but I quickly saw that it was going to be a big adventure. I'm really excited for the next 10 years. What we've got in front of us are incredible opportunities. From continuing our timber work and working on other species, there are literally hundreds of species that are stolen from forests every year. And we just get started with being able to create these genetic and chemical reference libraries for them, to being able to work on corals and running transects to look for how tourism is affecting these reefs, as well as how to protect them from impending storm events that have grown larger due to climate change. We're working on new ways with agriculture, looking at crop wild relatives, or the wild relatives of the 20 plus species that feed about 80% of the planet, and looking for the genes that can be used to improve crop yields without having to expand into additional wildlife habitat. Looking at things like land use, land coverage mapping, and building out projects that will enable the highest resolution land use, land coverage maps that have ever existed on the planet, down to 10-meter resolution, which will allow governments, will allow individual landowners, will allow business owners, will allow nonprofits to all have access to the same data and access to information that will be crucial for conservation for decades to come. Our work is not possible without the incredible volunteers who have worked with us over the last 10 years. More than 15,000 people have flocked to this idea, have become trained and become involved in the sciences in a way that they weren't previously. And they've fallen in love with giving back while they explore, at protecting our planet and looking for new ways that they can contribute while they're out doing what they love to do. I also just want to mention our board of directors, the many advisors who helped me get this started, and the incredible team of staff that have made our work successful. So again, I am so incredibly excited that you guys are here to celebrate with us tonight. It has been an honor to lead this organization for the last 10 years. And I'm really excited to turn it over to Alan, who's been one of those advisors for years now, and who's helped me get this organization going. He is a former senior vice president of engineering and head of knowledge at Google. In 2015, he jumped from 135,000 feet, breaking both the sound barrier and the world record for the highest free fall jump. He's on our advisory council, and I think that he'd be the first to tell you that he's anything but your typical hardcore adrenaline junkie. So here to share his story of why he went for such an audacious goal. Let's take it away, Alan. Thanks so much.
Hey, thank you for having me tonight. It's interesting because adventure and science, people think of these as kind of two distinct things. That the intersection between them is basically the null set. And I think one of the things I love about this organization, and why I'm wishing it a huge happy birthday here, is because you've shown that those aren't two distinct things, that there's an intersection between exploration and science and adventure and science that is a huge opportunity, for us as humans to be able to explore and contribute at the same time. So let's go to the next slide. The So stratospheric exploration, I mean, we're all about, going to places no one has ever been before, or certainly no one's ever spent much time on. And the stratosphere to me is that place. I mean, I've always loved engineering. I've always loved, uh, um, I'm a pilot. I've always loved skydiving. And the intersection of this is this place called the stratosphere. And I'm too old to become a NASA astronaut, although I always wanted to be. So the question is, how do you explore this area of the Earth that nobody has gotten a chance to see before? So go to the next slide, please. So this is what it looks like. This is from the International Space Station, but I can assure you it looks pretty much like this. There's this huge darkness of space out there. There's a very thin and fragile atmosphere, and then there's a beautiful planet underneath it. And that's the view that I wanted to participate in. And most people had done it with rockets and things like that. But the truth is there's kind of a kinder and gentler way that I want to explore. And it's more akin to scuba diving, which you'll see in the next slide. So scuba diving is a wonderful way to explore the oceans. You're not peering out a window. You are, involved in the atmosphere, in the water around you, and it's incredibly engaging. Rather than being in a submarine and looking out a tiny window. And that was the model I wanted to use. I wanted to use that for a couple of reasons. One is it's a particularly lightweight way to basically explore. You don't have to build a capsule around you. You don't have to build a rocket ship. You don't have to build a submarine. You are in the environment, and with absolutely the minimum number of things that you need to survive in that environment. And so that's what attracted me. And so the question was, can you build a scuba diving suit for the stratosphere? And that's what I spent a while doing, and built a team. And the answer is yes. This is what it looks like. You've got a parachute on the back. It's got, everything's redundant. So you've got a main parachute, a reserve parachute. You've got redundant oxygen supplies. You have a suit. This suit was made by ILC Dover, which is exactly the same suit maker that made all the Apollo suits, all the extra vehicle activity suits. It's really an interesting suit because it's one that you can actually move in while it's pressurized because of the really unique hinges that they have on. So the idea is, yes, you can build this, and it's pretty lightweight. It requires obviously a team of people, which we'll talk about in a second. But once you build it, you have to test it. And that's where it gets exciting because it's easy to make all the tests. And we ran like 250 tests in all different environments. But eventually, you have to get away from your creators and the engineers and the scientists and all that kind of stuff. And you have to, this suit has to survive with you in it on your own. So please advance to the next slide, and you'll see the big test. So this was the first time that we had, that I had actually, been in the suit. You can see these roller blades that we used to get us out of the plane. This turned out to be the final test. I take that back. We had done 4 or 5 tests. Some of them had gone well, some of them had gone poorly. But you can see me maneuvering here, going in one direction, going in the other direction. You can see the safety jumpers that are with me. And they're there if anything goes wrong to be able to help. And it's kind of interesting because that's what teamwork is all about. And many times, if you look at what we did, and you watch the movie or read the book or something, you'll see that things definitely went wrong at certain times, and having a team made all the difference. So this is once I get to the altitude, I pull the ripcord. I basically slow down, and my friends, the safety divers, their fun was not over. And so, at this point, we had demonstrated that the suit worked, that I could maneuver it, that we could free fall, that we had oxygen systems that would work. We had demonstrated that we could land the system. So we had gotten, this is probably the biggest checkpoint. But at some point, you have to then go up and show it at altitude. And we decided to go ahead and try to break the record that Red Bull had set up. Theirs was 128,000 feet, And so we picked an altitude that was more than 10% above it. I think you need 2% for a record. And so we went 128 plus a little bit, and then added some fudge factors, and we ended up with about 135, just shy of 136,000 feet. So let's take you to Roswell, New Mexico. This is the day of the jump. It actually started in the middle of the night. There's a helium truck there because we need a lot of helium to make this. We had little mod spaces. These are the flight operations people, doctors that are putting me in the suit. Took about 2 hours to put me in the suit. Once we got through that, you have to get me out to the launch pad. This was the easiest way to do it, with a forklift, basically. Now you can see this is the balloon. It's a huge balloon. I mean, once it's fully inflated and at altitude, you can fit an entire, sports stadium, like, Levi Stadium will fit inside this balloon. Matter of fact, every major sports stadium, and you pick any of them, it will fit inside this balloon. This is the launch. I'm waving with my left hand here. I'm banned from using my right hand, which is I'm right-handed, because the emergency disconnect is basically right above my right hand, so they won't let me use that. But you can see this long tail, and the higher you go up, the more the atmosphere gets thinner, and that tiny ball at the top gets bigger and bigger, and eventually it will be a big round ball. So here we are going up. We're probably at 10,000 feet here. We're going straight up at this point. Eventually we'll go through the jet stream, and then after the jet stream, we'll keep going up, and eventually we'll get into something called stratospheric winds, where the winds are actually at over 100,000 feet or over 100 miles an hour. So it's a challenging environment for the ground crews to keep up with me. This is mission control, and they're watching us basically as we move up through this atmosphere. A couple of my sisters are there. So now we're getting pretty high. Now you can start to see there's some lens effects here that make the curvature of the Earth seem a little bigger than it actually is. But you can definitely see the curvature of the Earth up there. You can start to really see the darkness of space and layers in the atmosphere. It's not just one layer. It's not just one gradual degradation, but there's tons of really interesting things to see. This is one of my favorite shots because it really gives you an idea of what it looks like at very high altitude. This is right before I was released. So if you want to know what it's like from 136,000 feet, that's what it looks like. So at some point we get up there, and then the decision is made to release me. It's done from the ground. I can do it manually too, but here's the release, and it's great because I'm in a perfect position. You can see me doing a little backflip here. I'm not showing off. I'm in 0G. I have no control, but you can see the balloon go by. You'll see it go by one more time here. You can see the drogue parachute, which has no wind resistance at this point, and there's the balloon go by a second time, which is, I think, beautiful. So the backflip wasn't intentional, but it was the first chance that I'd gotten to see what the balloon looked like and what the drogue parachute looked like. And so then I just start accelerating. There's no wind, there's no resistance. You're going so fast, and you're accelerating so quickly. I think it took about 40 seconds for me to break the sound barrier. I think at 51 seconds, I was at Mach 1.22, which is as fast as I get. And if you listen to the GoPros, at the very first instant that you hear any wind is the instant that you started slowing down. That's Mark Kelly, Senator Mark Kelly. He was actually there and had helped us with this project a lot. Anyway, now, with the 4 minutes and 27 seconds went by in a heartbeat in this little film. I opened the parachute, and a friend of mine, my wingman, a guy named Blickies, who did a huge amount of work. He jumped out. As soon as I was open, he flew over, jumped out, and he was my wingman on the way down. You'll see he's the first person to get to me. Here's the landing, or more appropriately called the crash. It's really, really hard in a spacesuit to land a parachute and do a stand-up landing, but it worked out well. That's Blickies coming over, give me a high five, and it was an incredible experience. That was the third of the balloon jumps. We had it down pretty much by then, but anyway, fun, wonderful experience that I don't know. I'll think back on for a very, very long time. This is, I think one of the things that you think about, when you're doing something like this is, the team itself and just how amazing they are and how they got you to this point. And just, how fortunate we are to be able to do these kind of adventures and to be able to build these kinds of teams and to be able to, push the envelope in really interesting ways. You can go to the next slide here. So this is the team at Roswell on the day of it. Actually, the team was smaller than this. There was a lot of people that were there the day of the jump, like the Roswell Fire Department is here. And, there was a bunch of, medical people there as well. But anyway, this is the team on the day of the event and some of the aircraft that were involved as well. And I always like to take this opportunity to thank the team, who was amazing. There's a lot more people that actually built things, and we're not in this picture, weren't necessarily the day of the jump. It made a big impact. A lot of companies that were involved as well. But I also want to thank my family. I think many times we miss that in the spirit of adventure. Our families sometimes get left behind, and we have to remember all the time just how fortunate we are that our families will allow us to do these things, because it's a considerable risk to them, just like it's a considerable risk to you. If you want to know more about it, there's a great movie called 14 Minutes from Earth. The guy on the far right there, Jerry Colbert, did it, and it gives a great introduction to the whole project and the dynamics. And you can see some of the places that we screwed up and had to basically do resets along the way. And then there's a book called Wild Black Yonder that was written by Jared Leidick that talks about the engineering involved. So anyway, thank you for having me. I'm grateful to be included on this amazing list of adventurers. Thank you for that. And thank you, Greg, for an amazing association for a long time. I've watched the organization grow from, essentially nothing to what it is today. And you're doing amazing work for science and amazing work for the planet, and also making adventure fun and interesting and useful at the same time. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Alan. That was amazing. I'll give you a clap on behalf of everybody here. I have so many questions about this, but I think probably like you, I've shared this desire to go to space since I was a little boy. And I've always kind of thought that would be the ultimate exploration. Like, I guess I've envisioned it as the pinnacle of my adventure career, which I'll do at some point when it becomes a little bit more accessible. I'm curious if the experience gave you that perspective that I dream about, and think that seeing the Earth from afar and looking down at the whole, it just seems like I would gain such perspective on what we are as a planet and a species and every other species on the planet. Can you talk about what you learned or felt from seeing it from there?
Yeah, it was interesting, because one of the things that's really cool about a balloon is that you start on the ground and you're actually looking straight down at little pebbles that are on the ground. I mean, on the launch sedan, is a foot off the ground. So I'm just looking straight down. And then at launch, all of a sudden you start going up. And the interesting thing about balloons is you go at a constant speed the whole way. So you're going at, roughly 1,000 to 1,200 feet per minute the whole way. And you can look at your watch and you can tell what time you're going to get to float altitude, just based on the fact that you'll continue. But it's kind of like Google Earth, you see pebbles, then you see rocks, and then you see roads, and then you see our people, and then you see cars, and then you see roads, and then you see, it just gets bigger and bigger as you go. And then you see whole states, and and then all of a sudden the atmosphere, this bright blue, starts getting darker and darker and darker. And then you're in this dark area and you're looking down on the planet. You're looking down at the atmosphere, and the atmosphere that you thought was going to be just, kind of this blended thing, actually starts appearing as having like lots of little layers. There's like icy, lacy layers and all these other things. And then you look up at the sky and you expect to see millions of stars, but the Earth's so bright that you actually can't see the stars, even though you're in a totally pitch black thing. I mean, there's people have talked about detachment effects where you get up there and you don't want to come home, you know, stuff like that. I never felt any of that. I was super happy to come back. But I do think it gives you an appreciation for our planet and the fragility of the tiny little slice of atmosphere in which we live and things like that. But for me, it just had a warm feeling that I really felt like you know, the culmination of just a lot of work over a lot of time and a lot of effort, and all came together at this magical moment. And you know, for me, that was tremendously special. And I don't remember that much about the actual jump and stuff like that, but I remember like all the people and all the contributions and stuff. Matter of fact, 2 of the people here started a company, and I just got back from a board meeting in Colorado today, you know, to try to continue to help them out on what they're doing. And 2 of the other people in this have started a company called Space Perspectives, and they're trying to make this accessible to everybody. They're trying to get to be able to take people up to 100,000 feet in a space tourism way. So I don't know, the whole thing was special.
Well, once it's safe enough, if they need a volunteer, you know where to find me. I'm pretty excited about that someday.
Yeah. And by the way, one thing that you said early on, which I really love and appreciate, is there was a moment where I had thought about this a lot. I had, you know, like Google Docs of all the things and how much oxygen I would need, all this kind of stuff. And I've, you know, I had the whole thing down, and there was a moment, it's like, well, should I just put it away and declare success? But what would happen, you know, 10 years, 20 years later? Would I regret the moment that I didn't do it, that I didn't build it, that I didn't fly it? And that was a pretty important moment for me, as to that decision between saying, well, it works on paper, to saying, you know, do I want to build it and make it real and actually do it? And I feel like that's a transition that, you know, that you make an adventure all the time. You know, you see some peak and there's this bit that flips and said, no, I have to climb it. I can't just look at the pictures anymore.
Amen. Thank you so much, Alan. And again, for all the support you provided over the years, the advice, it's been amazing having you as part of this. So thank you.
Great.
So we're going to move on to a little bit of trivia. There's going to be 3 trivias throughout the night. And if you get all 3 right, you're guaranteed to win a prize. So you want to stick around to the end for that, for sure. You're going to use the poll feature on your Zoom and get it ready to answer our first trivia of the night. And the prizes that you'll get are from our incredible sponsor, Mere Drinkware. And so the first question is, Adventure Scientists' very first volunteers were Damien and Willie Benegas, and they collected plant life up on Mount Everest. But Mount Everest isn't actually the tallest mountain on Earth. So what is the tallest mountain on Earth? Is it K2, Mauna Kea, Kilimanjaro, or Olympus Mons? No Googling it. Don't cheat. All right, 35 of you have voted. The poll, it looks like the poll was closed. All right. Does that mean we're moving on? I think that means we're moving on. And the answer is, drum roll, Mount Everest is the highest mountain above sea level, but Hawaii's Mauna Kea is the tallest mountain as measured from the base to the summit. Half of it is underwater, but at 33,500 feet, it measures 3/4 of a mile taller than Mount Everest. And Olympus Mons, the tallest mountain in the solar system, is almost 70,000 feet on Mars. Our volunteers are so hardcore, we'll probably have collected data there by our 100th anniversary. I hope that is very true. Cool. Julie Hotz is next. Big adventures don't have to start from the edge of space. Our next guest, Julie Hotz, began hers from her front door. Julie's a photographer, filmmaker, and multimedia storyteller. She's based in Austin, Texas. She's done some of America's most epic thru hikes. Yet rather than starting her adventures at the trailhead, like most of us do, she's made them even more challenging by also biking from her house to the trailhead. We're so thankful for Julie collecting data on 2 of our projects, which she'll tell you about here, along with sharing some of her takeaways from her travels. Welcome, Julie. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. Heads up, I am a little nervous because while I've done talks in front of people before, this is actually my first Zoom talk. And I wanted to give a little disclaimer before we start. If you need a cheerleader for doing something big, I love cheerleading and I love encouraging people to do big things and challenging themselves and do things they might not think are possible. But I know that it's a huge privilege and it takes time and money and resources, even if you're being scrappy, and which I love to be, as you'll see, I like to sleep in the dirt. But that's also why I love being able to give back, not just for the environment, but sharing knowledge and helping one another so we can all do more big things. So we can go to the next slide. And I'm going to start with why long distance human powered travel. One, how did I get into it? And why should other people do it? I'll start with why other people should do it is not only can it be a low carbon way to travel, but every different way of traveling offers a different perspective. You know, just like a road trip is so different from the view you see from a plane. When you slow down and get on a bicycle, the way you can observe is different. And then the way you can, when you walk for thousands of miles through the mountains. And to see the landscape change over thousands of miles by foot or by bicycle is really something amazing. How I got into it was that after grad school, a friend had told me about the Pacific Crest Trail, and it sounded wild, totally outside of my experience, outside of my comfort zone, out of anything I knew. I had never backpacked before, but it sounded amazing and wild, and it sounded like something that I would learn a lot from. And a couple years later, some friends of mine who had hiked the Appalachian Trail invited me to go hike the Pacific Crest Trail with them. And I decided, if I don't do this now, I'm never going to do it. So in 2010, I got on the Pacific Crest Trail, and you'll see in the top picture that I was very intimidated and terrified at the beginning, but by the end of my journey that year, I was joyous. I had fell in love with hiking, but it was a huge learning curve because it was my first backpacking trip. I had literally never been on another overnighter, but people along the way helped me learn. And I also learned not only to navigate through the landscape, but through the innerscape. There's so much time and space to ask questions when you're on a long hike. And you don't get to answer all those questions, but you get to live the questions and work through them. You know, I spend a lot of time living up here in my head, and to be in your body, walking every day or cycling every day, it helps you work through a lot of questions. That year, I did not finish the whole trail. I actually skipped a chunk of about 1,000 miles in the middle because I was a slow hiker and I was on a learning curve. And I decided that whatever I skipped, though, I promised myself I would come back and finish one day. But when I did get home, so many people were asking me, what was your hike like? And to summarize the hike, we can go back one slide. Well, to summarize a whole experience and months of going up and down mountains and the highest highs and the lowest lows, I was like, how can I distill this into a little sentence? And really it came down to, it was the hardest thing I'd ever done, but the best thing I'd ever done. And when for months, day after day, I would go down valleys and up mountains and then look over my shoulder and see, I came from there, that really changed my perspective and changed the way I viewed things. And it also, I realized that all the lessons I was learning on the trail were things that I could translate to my everyday life. Lessons in confidence and humility and the whole spectrum of human emotions. And then in 2013, I went and I finished the PCT. And this time it was a lot different because I wasn't on that same learning curve. Instead, it felt more like I was coming home. And instead of being the one who was gathering knowledge from other people, I was able to share the knowledge I knew. And I realized, so many people say like, oh, when I get off the trail and go back to real life, that being on the trail and doing a long adventure, a big adventure, was just as much of real life as being in my apartment in LA. And I realized that by having to come back and finish this portion of the PCT, it made me want to continue to do big things in my life, to incorporate them throughout my life, because it gave so much. So we can go to the next slide. After I finished the PCT, and just to let you know, in case you don't know what the Pacific Crest Trail is, it is a trail that runs from Mexico to Canada through California, Oregon, and Washington. So after I finished that trail, I got back home and started planning for my next adventure, which I decided I wanted to hike the Pacific Northwest Trail, which runs from Glacier National Park in Montana and undulates under the Canadian border and ends along the Washington Olympic coast. But before I got to that, I broke my back in 2014. And when life slows down and when you're working through injuries, it's another great time to ask a lot of questions. And I started wondering how much of me going out and doing these big things, even though I considered it very much an incorporated part of my life, how much of it was escapism? I also started wondering, I feel like I'm taking resources when I go outside. How can I give back? And when I'm solo, how could I, when I was going solo, I was wondering how could I also build a community along the way? And finally, I asked, when there's big things going on, again, it takes a lot of resources. So how could adventure be made more accessible? I would always tell people, I think you can have an adventure right out your front door. And so why didn't I put my money where my mouth was? And I decided to get to the Pacific Northwest Trailhead. I was going to bike there. I would walk out my front door and bike to the trailhead. And so I left in May of 2015, and I went through California, Arizona, Utah, Wyoming, the edge of Idaho, and up into Montana. And that answered the question of, how can I make the start of an adventure a little more accessible? I left out my front door. But as I was trying to figure out ways to give back, I thought, well, maybe I can raise some money for a cause. And I started looking around for, for different nonprofits, and I found adventure scientists. And I realized through that, not only could I maybe raise some money, but I could participate and bring the community aspect into it at the same time. And that year, they were doing the microplastic survey as well as the roadkill survey, or the nature connectivity. And since I was on so many miles of road, both on the bike and along the trail, I was able to collect data the whole way. And not only was I connecting to the community of ecological kin and hoping to save for the future, I was connecting to people I didn't even know by logging the roadkill along the way. There were people on the same apps I was logging that would help identify some of the subspecies that I didn't know enough about. And I was sending water off to labs where folks were going through the water, and they were, even though we never connected personally, it felt like I was a part of a community at large. And then when I got to the trailhead of the Pacific Northwest Trailhead, I met up with my hiking partner, Grace, and we can go to the next slide. And the thing that was so different about this trail is that it was not well maintained the whole way like the Pacific Crest Trail is. And I had to embrace every type of trail, from road walking to bushwalking to everything in between. You can see in this top photo that Grace is there boulder hopping through a trailless section in Montana. And below, she's in near farmland in Idaho. And on the next slide, you can see that here is another hiker, Honeybee, and she is in a bushwalking part of Idaho where we had to cling to huckleberry bushes to get us through. And Grace, my hiking partner, is in the bottom photo on a road walk. In the following slide, here's a BLM road. And the last slide is another hiker along one of the coast walks. And I loved that it took me through so many different types of roads. And it really felt like a continuous part of the spirit of leaving out my front door, taking whatever kind of road, whatever kind of trail was set before me. But then along the way, you can go to the next slide, there were other variables that hit. I broke a pinky toe, which I never realized how important pinky toes are until I broke it in the middle of the trail. And it really forced me to embrace a new variable, one that had to change my mindset and my attitude. I got pretty upset about how plan A was not working out like I wanted it to. But I gave myself the option to adjust my attitude or to go home. And when I adjusted to the variables and rerouted, new possibilities opened up. I had to reroute that year because of wildfires and because I took so long letting my toe heal. But I ended up finishing and going back to the middle portion of the Cascades. And I got to see golden larches in larch season, which is something I never would have seen if I hadn't broken my toe. And when I came back home, I realized embracing the variables and the ideas of, plan A is not necessarily or inherently better than plan B or plan C. And if I embrace the variables along the way, I can move through the unknown and take on challenges and deal with uncertainty in new ways. It allowed my hiking partner and I to try totally different types of challenges and more technical ones, because we knew we didn't have to do it exactly as planned if we needed to reroute because of intuition or because of safety. And it allowed us to take on all kinds of new and off-trail challenges that we had never done before. And go to the next slide. And, this past year with the pandemic, I kept coming back to these lessons I've learned along the trail about, embracing variables happens in every part of our lives. And while my plan A last year was not to stay home all year, I was reminded of finding beauty wherever I am. And maybe you're like, I would love to do a big thing, Julie, but right now I'm caretaking children, or what, my bank account only has $50. I think we can re-envision and reroute and embrace variables to find big things that work for us now, as well as plan for ones in the future. And a good example of that is in 2018, I lived in New York City for several months, and I started walking New York City. That year, I didn't have the opportunity to travel much. And so I decided to walk every single borough from north to south. And through just Googling things along the way, I learned so much about history, ecology, sociology, and demographics. Here's some pictures from Manhattan and then Brooklyn. And next slide is from the Bronx. And the next slide is Queens. This is Eastern Manhattan. I did 2 walks, one on the east and one on the west. And then I walked Queens. And a fun fact, Queens, New York contains the only national wildlife refuge in the US that is accessible by metro train. And then finally, I walked Staten Island. And even though this was a total different big adventure than leaving from my front door to go to Montana and walk across mountains, I learned so much about my own backyard. And taking this to this past year has really allowed me to explore my own backyard here in Austin, Texas in new ways. And so I encourage you, whether you can do something really big, if you can't take off 4 months or you're planning for a trip a decade from now, find ways to connect and give back to the people around you and to the environment around you, and make a plan to do a big local adventure. And please feel free, if you have any questions also, you can go to my website, juliehotz.com, and contact me. I love talking and cheerleading other people.
Amazing, Julie. Thank you so much. And just a reminder, you can throw your Q&A into that button as well, into the Q&A button, and we can type in answers. And if there's more at the end, then we can answer them then as well. Julie, that was really amazing. You kind of alluded to this idea of seeing each of the little parts as you move across them. And I think it really ties with what Alan was talking about too, as he was going up, you're going along him. And that was something I felt on my adventures too, that the connection that you see between these communities as you walk through them is really spectacular. Was that something you really paid attention to and felt as well?
Absolutely. And that's one thing I really like about the continuous line, whether it's like zooming out, into the stratosphere or walking the same line, getting to see things transform. And yeah, it's a perspective that we don't see day to day. And so it gives you new insights to the world around you and to yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Well, thank you again. That was absolutely amazing. Our next speaker is Hari Nix. I've known Hari for years as well, but our first two guests incorporated science into their adventures, and our next two guests actually adventure in pursuit of science. Hari is an assistant professor of environmental studies and sciences at Santa Clara University in California, specializing in how components of Earth's systems interact, from plate tectonics to climate to life on the planet. He's also a world-class mountaineer, a former competitive runner, and a hardcore yo-yo aficionado, even designing his own performance yo-yo. We've been lucky to have Hari collect data to focus on several mountain projects. Hari, it's really great to see you. It's been amazing to have you as part of the Adventure Scientist family for years now, and I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, well, thanks so much, Greg. It's really happy for me to be here, and especially on this really cool occasion. Yeah, let's go to the first slide. So Alan kind of stole my entire intro. I was going to make the exact same argument that Alan made, and I even threw it into my title slide here. So this is an image of me in 2016 making the last few steps to the foresummit of an unclimbed peak in Nepal called Langdang. It's about 21,000 feet. It's in the Rolwaling Valley, which is the next valley over from where Everest is. And something like this definitely goes into the hardcore hobby category, in the sense that it's not what I'm paid to do per se, but it's really the exact same process that science is. It's the same process of exploration and of discovery. A process like this for me is continuous and year round, and all I'm doing is planning my next adventures, trying to explore new places. In some cases, climb new routes, like a new route that I climbed in the Andes or here in the Himalaya. And so I really think that what adventure scientists are doing is not, some crazy matchmaking scheme, taking this one community of people and this other community of people and forcing a connection. You're really actually creating this natural synergy and kind of exploiting the fact that what we're all actually doing is trying to discover new things. So that's kind of my argument there in one slide. Next slide. So mountains for me have always been the thread that kind of connects the whole rest of my life, that makes the whole rest of my life make sense. As a 5-year-old, I was drawing maps of Tibet, memorizing lists of the world's highest mountains and all that. Here's an image of me in Colorado, and that's not my dad. I actually saved up for a few years mowing lawns to be able to hire a mountain guide and take an alpine climbing course. And so over the years, I continued to build the skills and experience and assemble these things, and just mountains became a bigger and bigger part of my life. Next slide. And so when I was in graduate school, I had a lot of time, but not a lot of money. So I was trying to figure out how to climb as much as I could with the resources that I had. And we had a National Science Foundation grant to do research on the climate history of Central Asia, specifically in Mongolia. So I had free travel to Mongolia, but I wanted to piggyback on that and add a climbing trip. And so I repeatedly did this, climbing the highest mountains in Central Asia. And so this is what actually led me to Greg and to Adventure Scientist. Was I was planning an upcoming trip to Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, and I wanted to add a different dimension to it. I was also at a point in my career where things were kind of upward and outward, and I wanted to create more relationships with other scientists. I wanted to learn different skills. You know, I had some skills as a geochemist in terms of how to do my field work, but I wanted to meet other people and see what else was compatible with my skill set. So next slide. So this is a picture from Advanced Base Camp on Lenin Peak. It's the second highest mountain in Kyrgyzstan. It's over 24,000 feet high. And it has a reputation as being one of the, quote, easiest 7,000 meter peaks in the world. Now, whenever I hear that distinction these days, I know better. So we actually had a really tough time climbing this mountain. Very, very bad weather, lots of snow. But on this climb is when I actually did my very first project with Adventure Scientists. Next slide. So basically, and we can actually, you can advance it even one more. We have, and another one maybe, where we see a picture of Dragos. Yes, so here we have Dragos Zarescu. Dragos is at the time he was a postdoc at the Biosphere 2, the University of Arizona. And he works on microbes in extreme environments. Basically, what are the limits of microbial life? And one of the crazy environments to collect these things from were rocks from extreme altitudes, and especially getting a transect of multiple altitudes in the same geographic location. So a mountain is the perfect place to do it. If I could collect rocks from the top to the bottom, it would work. This is also the first time I learned that you always collect your rock samples on the way down the mountain. It's always a good idea. Next slide. So we had an unbelievably hard time climbing this mountain. 12 hours straight, going in waist deep, no food, no water. Everyone was really sick. And we would take 20 steps at the front of the line and then switch. It was me and a couple guys from Azerbaijan and a couple Polish guys that put in all this work, no boot track. But when I did get to the summit, next slide, I took my last swig of water. I didn't have enough energy for the hero shot. I just kind of buried my head in the snow. And then next slide, I collected my final rock sample of the trip. I believe it's the highest rock sample for microbial analysis that's ever been collected. So, you know, again, it's over 24,000 feet, and descended into a raging storm. We were very lucky to find our way back to camp. We had no visibility, and without the GPS, it would have been really serious. So the next time that I worked with Adventure Scientists was in 2013 in Nepal. Here we are looking at Nuptse, the 20th highest mountain in the world. Mount Everest is right behind it and out of view. And I was embedded within an Everest team, although I was climbing Lhotse, which is off there on the right. That's the 4th highest mountain in the world. And I was trying to climb that without using supplemental oxygen. It's been a real effort of mine over the last 8 years to climb the world's highest mountains without using supplemental oxygen. This was my first attempt on it. It took 5 tries before I was able to summit an 8,000er without oxygen. And I was actually doing research embedded within this Everest team, but I wanted to add an environmental dimension to what I was doing. Next slide. This is a look at Camp 1 on Mount Everest. I was collecting snow and ice samples for a researcher named Natalie Kehrwald on the next slide. And so what I was doing was getting into these really ridiculous places where, you know, people have a hard time sampling just because they're at extremely high altitude. So here I am at 20,000 feet next to Mount Everest, rappelling off of a crevasse to collect different layers in the snow. You can actually see the black lines there. Those are dust layers that are annual. So each one of those lines is a different year. And that reason that it is dust, that it's dark colored, is that that's actually air pollution. It's coming from northern India. It's coming from the lower elevation areas in Nepal. It's a lot of people burning biomass, cooking indoors, heating their homes and things like that. And the problem there is that that soot deposits onto the glaciers. It's very dark colored, and then it accelerates the melting. And so the project was ostensibly to measure the types of dust and the concentrations of dust, and to actually assess changes in Himalayan glacial melting rates. One of our interesting kind of sidebar findings is that we ran a certain type of chlorine isotope, very rare isotope that is a byproduct of radiation. And we actually found the Fukushima radiation in snow on Mount Everest. So remember the 2011 Japanese earthquake and nuclear disaster following that tsunami. That radiation actually made it into the westerlies, which are the global circulating winds in the mid latitudes, and it actually went all the way around the Earth. So it went from Japan all the way around Earth the long way, and actually made it into Himalayan precipitation. So the radiation went everywhere. Next slide. This is a look up at Lhotse, the world's 4th highest mountain that I was trying to climb from Camp 2 on Mount Everest. And these clouds are swirling like crazy. They're going over 100 miles an hour. It's literally the jet stream. So this is a day when the summit of Everest would have been unclimbable due to the high winds, because it's actually situated in the jet stream. But what I had done is I'd heard via Damien and Willie Venegas and Greg, I'd heard about this crazy high plant life. And so I went looking above Camp 2. I climbed a bit off the route, searching for life, and actually found some. Next slide. So I believe this is basically a tie with the highest plant ever found. I don't know exactly where Damien and Willie got theirs, but we got it from roughly the same spot. This moss in this crack is about, it's over 21,000 feet high here. And so I actually did send a sample of this plant to researchers that Greg connected me with. That was really, really cool to do something like that. We think we know a location where we could find plants maybe 2,000 or 3,000 feet higher, but it's actually fairly serious. It would be somewhat risky climbing to actually access it, but I think there's a chance. So if people are going back to Everest, there might actually be a way to see the limits of plant life even further. Next slide. So finally, I am finding my creative niche as a scientist. This is a picture of a guy named Pasang Sherpa. This is in northern Pakistan, on the Pakistan-China border, on the world's 13th highest mountain that I climbed, called Gasherbrum 2. In 2019, I summited 2 of the world's highest mountains without oxygen in just a 2-week period. It's extremely rare to climb more than one 8,000er in a season because they just take so much out of you. I mean, on this trip, I lost 16 pounds, and a lot of it was muscle. It's really hard. It's also the same type of thing that Julie was talking about. To go on these 8,000 meter trips, you really have this like long contemplative period because to climb mountains of this size, it usually takes about 2 months. So these are really serious trips. And I was running into this issue with my conventional career of being a professor, where the standard thing to do is get tenure and be a full-time professor, and you do your teaching, you do your research, etc. And I still want to do all those things, but I have this other creative niche, this outlet that I have in the mountains. The fact that I do my own research in the mountains, the fact that I'm connected to other people, that I do science communication about the mountains. And so it was becoming more and more incompatible for me to have this regular job and then to have this hobby. And the fact of the matter is, like I said in the first slide, they're not different. They're actually literally the exact same thing, what I'm trying to do here. And so I actually am in the middle of discussing this with my university, and they seem very on board. The idea would be to carve out a role where I do go to the Himalayas multiple times per year, where I continue to do this type of science, where I teach climate change classes at the university when I'm back here, probably like in the winter, for example, not a good Himalayan climbing month unless you're totally insane. And I get to still work with students. I get to still write grants, do my research and all that. So I'm doubling down on this. The mountains are going to be my direction forward indefinitely. And so keep me in mind, use my skill set. let's further our mission together. Okay, I'm a scientist. I want to keep doing this stuff. I want to collect data, help other people, talk about other people's projects, get people excited, bring people with me, you name it. So here's my personal website and my personal email. With that, I'll just thank you again.
Thanks so much, Ari. Holy cow. First of all, your photography is absolutely incredible. Is that all stuff you shot, or is that kind of people on
Oh
the
gosh,
trips with
no.
you?
Oh no, I do a full calendar every year. I'm gonna probably ramp it up even a little bit more, but it was very hard for me to just pick the shots for this talk. I could have made this talk 30 different ways. So yeah.
Cool, good for you. That's amazing. We have a question in the Q&A about what sort of microbial stuff was found on the rocks that you did with Dragos. Can you speak a little bit more to that and the science that you guys were doing?
I know that he published an abstract. I don't know if he actually published a full manuscript on this topic. I'd hesitate to comment on like specific microbial communities, but he did get microbial data. So he did actually get like quantities and kind of distributions of different types of microbes at these things. I don't know enough. I would be happy to reach out and get back to you on it, but I don't know enough to say what his main like sales pitch for his takeaways are. Yeah, I know that the work got done, and we have collaborated on it since.
That's cool. And you were one of about 20 people, I think, that were all around the globe. And what was so cool is years later, Dragos and I saw each other at a conference, and he showed me this photo of a web that he had on his board where it was your expedition and it was connected to all these other expeditions. And he was mapping the microbes and had continued working with our volunteers ongoing after they had gone out. But he was looking at nutrient cycling and the exposure to these really extreme UV environments and how it affected nutrient cycling up there.
Given that he was at Biosphere 2, I mean, the whole idea for them is to look at extreme environments as analogs for other parts of the universe. So that's the kind of aim, the why behind what they're doing in the first place. And then maybe you can tell me about what happened with the results from Damian Willey's plant finding, because I believe I sent that plant, my plant, along with theirs. Yeah.
Totally. So that was a researcher named Rusty Rodriguez. He's got a company called Adaptive Symbiotic Technologies, and he has been able to take what you guys found up in that extreme environment, along with what he found in Yellowstone and other areas where there's extremophiles growing there. Those are mostly bacteria, but he found extremophile plants growing close to hot springs as well. And he's been able to isolate this family of fungi that are now inoculating about 3-4 million acres a year across the US. 600 small farms in India are using this, and it is doubling crop yields without the need for synthetic fertilizers, especially in the most extreme environments. So the more marginalized soils are, the more it seems to benefit them. But really incredible way to increase crop yields using natural symbioses. And as we expand as a population to what's going to be 10 billion people in just a half a century now, it is pretty essential that we learn how to do that. So his technology is working. It's pretty incredible. Yeah.
Real quickly, I forgot the kind of future directions for this year in terms of new science. So one is going to be my own work on timing the uplift of the Himalaya. I'm working with my old PhD advisor at Stanford on that. So I'll be collecting quartz samples and snow samples from these upcoming trips to actually time the uplift of those peaks. And then I'm also working with Herman Ponster at Duke, who's a leading researcher in the area of metabolism. And we're going to be doing metabolic studies on me and then also other climbers, some altitude adapted populations like Sherpas, some non, and basically looking at the limits of human energy expenditure, the limits of metabolism in this extreme, setting of a high altitude expedition.
Amazing. Yep. Awesome stuff. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Yeah. We're going to move to our second trivia question. And this question is that volunteers for our microplastics project collected water samples from every ocean on Earth. Which of these is not an ocean? The Indian, the Southern, the Baltic, or the Arctic Ocean? like Baltic is winning. Get those votes in. We'll keep it open for another few seconds here. Make sure you vote. You got to vote 3 times to win your prize. And everybody's going to get an amazing set from Mir, one of our great partners and sponsors. 34 of you have voted. All right, 10 more seconds. 9. All right. So the answer is the Baltic. The Baltic in Northern Europe is a sea, not an ocean. Seas are smaller than oceans and typically bordered by land. One exception is the Saragossa Sea, which is defined by ocean currents and sits in the middle of the North Atlantic. And our volunteers gathered samples in the Baltic and the Saragossa Seas too. All right. So next is Ashlee, Ashlee Earl. And for her, adventure isn't always going to be about getting to the highest peaks or far into the backcountry. Some of the most thrilling stories of exploration come from the frontiers of science. Ashlee Earl is a research scientist at the Broad Institute of MIT and Harvard. She was one of our scientific partners on a project to combat the growing threat of antibiotic resistance by looking in nature for the precursors of genes that make bacteria resist even our most potent antibiotics. She has led dozens of local and international collaborations to study tuberculosis, hospital-acquired infections from so-called superbugs, and more. Joining us very kindly from far too late there on the East Coast, I'd like to welcome Ashlee.
Oh, thank you, Greg. Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be part of this celebration, and I appreciate you and the other folks at Adventure Scientists for giving me this opportunity. This is so awesome. And I have to say, I know what everyone who is here is thinking, and that is, wow, the speakers that came before are absolutely extraordinary, just jaw-dropping. And I knew, I had a hunch, and I was right, that they were going to show up with some pretty fantastic pictures, some fantastic, beautiful images. So I thought I would bring one of my own. Can you advance the slide, please? So here it is, this beautiful early scientific form of Ashlee Earl, the scientist. So here I am showing off my 5th grade science project, the mouse maze, which was all about trying to understand whether female mice or male mice can complete the maze faster. It turned out the results were inconclusive. The female got pregnant during the studies, so some confounding factors there. So we may never know, but it turned out that the Ashlee Earl in this picture, for reasons I can't fully explain, I already knew that I wanted to be a scientist. In fact, there was autobiographical evidence that I found in 2nd grade where I talked about wanting to be a scientist or an actress or a singer. And though I didn't become an actor or a singer, I did actually become a musician. Can you advance the slide? So there we go, some more braces. So this is actually me, 7th grade, I think, Christmas, holding one of my first guitars. And by this point, I had already started to train as a classical flautist, and went on to play in orchestras and all kinds of ensembles, and also picked up guitar and played in bands in high school and college. And while it's actually sad that I don't play music today, I kind of think of it as sort of my phantom sort of limb. I still really love music. I love music, and I think probably like many of you, it has a lot to do with the way it makes me feel, and I think also the way it has sort of a power on others. When I think about it, probably one of the only times I can recall seeing my father cry was me playing some sappy song on the flute in our living room. And so I think that's what music does to it. It's what it does to us. And let's advance the slide, please. And that's why I think it really is what led Henry Longfellow to make this quote, which is music really is, it's the universal language of mankind. It doesn't matter what race you are, what religion, what your socioeconomic background is. We feel it, we understand it. I don't have to know what someone's is singing a song about, what language they're singing in. just through the music, you can understand it. So what does this have to do with science? So, when I was invited to talk about this, and thinking about, what I was up to during the pandemic, and, one of the things I was thinking a lot about is sort of this intersection. And, first off, I think it's kind of just helpful to recognize that, before there was science and Koch's postulates and microscopes and, the world we used art and music to really communicate about our world, right? So I think that's sort of helpful to remember. But I think the other thing I was thinking a lot about is that I think scientists, today and probably always, we've been really challenged to speak universally, to speak in that way that really reaches everyone. And I think that matters a lot. And perhaps like many of you on this call, I fear that we're in some ways in a dangerous time, where there's a lot of people, out there who, for a variety of reasons, have decided to challenge facts, truth, doubt science. And it's led, I think, to a lot of fringe views that, and policies, right, that, threaten us today, but also impact potentially generations to come. Harry mentioned climate change. I mean, I think that's huge. And we'll take one of the problems that we study in my group, and that is the issue of antibiotic resistance. So here I'm using art to sort of tell us about a time when, we really couldn't control infectious diseases in the way that we can now. And at the time of the plague of the Justinian here, many, many moons ago, this was the case, and it led to really dramatic repercussions for the earth. This was the plague was a bacterial infection. It's thought to have killed half of the world's population, somewhere between 30 to 50 million people. Even suspected to have brought down the Roman Empire. Just to put that into perspective, the COVID virus, SARS-CoV-2, has so far killed fewer than 0.05% of the world's population. So still absolutely devastating. But thanks to science, thanks to technology, we now, for instance, have, multiple highly effective vaccines that will undoubtedly prevent us from, entering into the Justinian plague or anything like that. So, and of course, thanks to science, many of us have grown up at a time where, we didn't wake up worried about a bacterial infection, sweeping across the world. And that's because of antibiotics, right? We've been so lucky to live in this time. In the past century, we've had antibiotics there that have helped to stave off these kinds of bacterial infections. And so I think it might be, surprising to many of us that because of the rise of antibiotic resistance, in many ways, we're going right back to this time of plague. There are predictions now, this is a pretty scary one, that by 2050, Greg mentioned this at the start, by 2050, a time I plan on being around in 2050, there will be an estimated 10 million deaths from antibiotic resistant infections. Just from resistant infections. I mean, that's huge. It's like the plague of Justinian happening over and over and over again. And not to mention, how that'll fundamentally change some of the calculus, around, how we sort of take care of ourselves, how we deal with the health of our bodies. You want to have a joint replacement? Well, let's think about whether it makes sense, given that you might get an infection that we can't treat. So it's a big deal. But I think the point I want to make is that it's not inevitable. It's not inevitable. Can you advance this slide, please? And so I think Alan may have taken this picture for us here. So here, it's just the point to make that it really, in order to make this not come to pass, it requires all of us, right? And we've heard this, it takes the team, it takes community. if we want to confront things that are big, like climate change, like antibiotic resistance, we're going to have to figure out a way to really get all of us involved. We've got to be able to bring science to the table and figure out how each of us can work together to turn the tide. And so this is what I've been thinking about. If you can advance, as I've been at home, over the past year in the pandemic, still fortunately able to work with my team and work on data sets and write our papers, is all of that work amounting to what we need it to amount to, right? Are we speaking universally enough so that, the objective truths that we hold so dear are actually being received? I think this is the challenge. This is the problem that I think we face, and the opportunity. And I don't know what the answers are really. I think it's worth pondering, certainly, but I do know that organizations like this one have got to be a piece of the it's a puzzle piece in the answer to this problem. Can you advance the slide? So I just want to give a shout out. So Greg also mentioned this already, but I think for me, it's just been extraordinary to see what adventurers and scientists for conservation can do. So here's Greg. You guys all know Greg. And then my buddy and longtime collaborator, Mike Gilmore here, who a couple years ago sort of conceived this really cool project to, engage adventurers, engage, the public, citizen scientists, to really go out there, roll up sleeves, and literally pick up poop from around the world, right? All these far-flung places that, that Harry goes to, and Alan and Julie, and to help bring that in, bring those samples into the lab, so we can start shining light on questions around antibiotic resistance and look in places we've never been able to look before. So far, we've already found 18 different species of life from this exploration that's been helped by this organization. And we're starting to get the contrast we need to really understand some of the issues that are plaguing, people in hospitals. So it's been quite extraordinary. And again, I think that this is it, right? This is part of what we need to start building the bridges that can begin to allow people to start to speak a common language, to begin to understand the problem in a common way, and then to ultimately co-own the solutions. So this is the kind of thing that actually is, it's daunting, but it gets me really excited. And I think it's the kind of thing that, we want to amplify. When Greg was showing at the beginning, all of the adventurers and the scientists go out there, and the many pictures overlapping, going out there and doing this work, in support of these really challenging questions. It literally, I feel like it brings tears to my eyes because we so desperately need it. We really do. And I think it's, it's exciting and it's so important. Cue the cute picture of child next. Right? So this is why, this is part of what makes me so passionate about wanting to make sure not only that we're getting the work done, but that it's landing, that it's going to have the impact that we really want. So here's my future scientist. This is my son, William, last week exploring, little things with his microscope, and I show him here to also remind me to just share with you that it's not all about doom and gloom. And I think this might be part of the issue. The truth is, we're sort of trained as scientists. You have to get the funding, and you have to talk about how you're solving, these very specific, challenging problems, things with human health. But the truth is, science is so much more than trying to stave off, a pandemic. It's so much more. It's about, adventure. As someone, I think that's point's been made. I think it's beautiful and it's true. It's about puzzles. It's about really going and exploring new frontiers. And I can just tell you that for the science that, we're focused on, the frontiers just seem limitless. How can we, begin to understand and harness these microbes in a way not just like keep them from making us sick, but like we're learning things about how they make us who we are. How can we harness that to, allow us to live better lives, longer lives, to allow us to, someone touched on sustainability of food and, how we live and how we eat, charting course, not only for life on this planet, but what about the next planet, right? So I think these are just extraordinary opportunities. And this is where, I think the bridge we need to be building should begin, and sort of like, not only just like, here's the challenges, but like, here's like the promise and the excitement. So we have a lot to learn, but a lot of adventure awaits. And I, again, I think it's so critical that we, really think about how to harness this by working together, communicating, making sure that the scientists and the public are really sort of hand in glove, because we need it. And so I want to thank, again, Greg and the adventure scientists for really helping to enable, this conversation. And I really wish you an incredible next 10 years and beyond. We love you. We need you. So keep up the good work.
Thank you so much, Ashlee. Been amazing to learn from you and Mike, and I think about sitting out on that deck in Aspen together and just picking you guys' brain on antibiotic resistance. And it's been one of the greatest joys of my last 10 years is learning from researchers like you and having the opportunity to get to know you guys. So I just think of you as an incredible hero of mine, and you are out at the frontiers saving us all. So thank you for that incredible work. Before we jump in, go ahead, Ashlee, sorry.
I was just going to say it's totally mutual. Totally mutual.
Nice. We're going to do a quick question 3 here. Realize we're over time. That one is in 2014, volunteers set up camera traps in Washington's Olympic Mountains in hopes of documenting a rarely photographed yet fierce predator. Was it a northern jaguar, a Pacific marten, a Sasquatch, or a dire wolf? Get your answers in. We'll give it 10 more seconds here. 32 of you have responded, still coming in. Get that mirror gear. They're really amazing mugs you're gonna get and thermoses. They make this really incredible gear and are great supporters of ours and partners of ours. Can't thank Mir enough. And we'll go 3, 2, 1. All right. So the answer is B, Pacific marten. Good job. The pint-sized but aggressive predator, which looks somewhat like a weasel, hadn't been seen alive in the Olympic Peninsula for decades when our volunteers ventured into the winter backcountry. The camera traps they set up didn't turn up martens, but it did enable our scientific partner, Betsy Howell, to get increased funding for her work. And in the years since, at least 15 martens have been spotted in the area. And north for jaguar is Mexico. The dire wolf is extinct, and the Sasquatch, well, he outsmarted our camera traps as well. So we will do a quick Q&A here. If the rest of the speakers want to turn on their cameras, then we can all respond to these. And the first question I've got here is for Hari. Hari, what would you say to people who want to climb Mount Everest?
Well, I'm one of them. I do have my own twist, which is that I want to do it under my own power. I want to do it without oxygen. I think it's a worthy goal, but I think a lot of people who have just the focus on Everest and maybe they just want to skip some steps in terms of how to get there. I would say do it when you're ready. Do it when you've truly, worked your way up to it, and it'll mean a lot more. It is becoming more and more possible now to reach Everest, specifically with using lots and lots of oxygen, and that really is increasing things. there are a lot of other mountains and a lot of other experiences you can have. And I would just say, just go other places, climb other mountains, climb lower mountains first. There's so many good things to do. And I've been on 15 Himalayan expeditions now, and Everest is a shit show. So like, there are a lot of things that detract from it. I don't want to badmouth it because I love it too. And I think it's the same type of thing as, Yosemite Valley or the South Rim of the Grand Canyon. I mean, there are places in the world that are popular for a reason, and Everest isn't going anywhere. It's a really special place, but there's a lot that comes with it. So I would just say work up to it. Just go climbing for having fun climbing, climb other peaks around the world, build the skills, build the experience. And if you still want to climb Mount Everest, do it.
Amen. This next one's for Julie. What adventure do you want to do next? What's on your list?
I'm always dreaming and scheming. I'm hoping to possibly hike a big portion of the Idaho Centennial Trail this summer. The hiking partner that I would go with doesn't have an availability window till late summer, and it is a very dry year. So we'll also have to see what the forest fires allow us to do. But if not, we're looking at backups, and at the very least, I'll go outside this summer.
Right on. Alan, someone's wondering if you were a skydiver before you began your, what they call, insane quest.
Yeah, I started skydiving when I was 18. My best friend in the world at the time, he twisted my arm, honestly, when he turned 18 to go skydiving. And that was the days before tandem. You had to get in giant boots and a hot suit in Florida and jump into a sand pit for an entire day so that you don't break your ankles in the attempt. And anyway, I did it with him only because he forced me to do it. And then that was going to be one and done. That was a bucket list checked off. But he came out of that jump and he says, "Wow, wasn't that the most fantastic thing you've ever done? Let's do it again." And when a friend says that, it's like, well, I don't know. But then I got my our performance rating on it, and I had done really well, and he had done really poorly on his first jump, and so I stuck with it, and then ended up making, I think I'm up to around 700-800 jumps, which seems like a lot to people that don't jump, but there are people out there with 30,000 jumps. But anyway, went away from it, came back to it. But skydiving is still fun. I'll tell you, it's always fun.
Great. When I was, I went to, I had been kicked out of high school when I was 16, and I went to a junior college. And at that junior college, there was a pool of funds to start a club. And so a friend and I started a skydiving club there, which meant that we got the junior college to pay for us to go on 2 jumps. And so I've got probably 4 jumps to my name to date. So Alan, maybe we'll do some tandem action at some point. You can take me on some tandem jumps.
I did have to get my tandem instructor rating, but it's a long story. But yeah, I'm definitely not qualified to take you, but I have friends that are.
Fair enough. Cool. And Ashlee, I think one of the most fascinating things about your work is some of the machine learning stuff that you do, and how you incorporate that in. Can you speak a little bit about the process of analyzing all the bacteria that come in and all of the complexity that's part of that?
Ooh. How much time do we have? No, it's, well, our tool of choice is the sequencer. So, we try to let the genomes of the organism speak to us. And so when we get, samples from you and your crew, the process through which they come in is, and Harry, I know, knows this well. They come in and we try to see if we can coax things out of them to grow in sort of conditions that support the kind of life that we're looking for. And then once we get those, those things growing, then we get the DNA out of them and we put them on our sequencer. And that's, that's kind of where my team's work really begins, is sort of taking the sequences that come out the other end of that machine and asking a variety of different questions about how the DNA, the genomes of these organisms compare to one another, And, we use a ton of different tools, when machine learning approaches, AI approaches are appropriate, we use them. When other kinds of approaches are appropriate, we use those. We sort of, tailor the approach to the kinds of questions, the kind of data sets that we have. But I think what's just to sort of, talk again about how important the work that we've done with you and this organization has been. A lot of the questions that that we have, the most pressing questions, we haven't been able to answer them well. And that's partly because of a real focus on the genomes of the organisms that make people sick, right? That makes sense. What do people want to put on the machines? Like all the things that make people sick. But just like it's so critical to know what light is to understand dark, you need to understand the other component, the other part of the equation, which is like the things that don't make people sick, the things that haven't been bombarded with antibiotics and have grown resistant. And so that really is, I think, been such a transformative piece of our collaboration, is like to bring that information to the table so we have that contrast and we can start to do those comparisons using a variety of tools that are now giving us hints about what really makes the things that are troublesome really tick. So it's a lot. Anyway, I could talk about this for a long time. I'll stop.
I could listen to it for hours too, but it is very late, and I know you have two small kids, and it's 11:30 where you, or 10:30 where you are. But thank you so much to each of our panelists for being here. Thank you to everybody for joining us. Those of you who won, who got all three questions right, will get an email from us and our team tomorrow, and we'll make sure we have the right shipping address to send you your prize. And for anybody who would like to celebrate our anniversary and support our volunteers by making a gift to Adventure Scientists, all gifts between $25 and $250 will be matched by a generous donor through May 28th, up to $5,000. And you can donate to the organization at donate.adventurescientist.org. And as I began with, I just can't say how thankful I am to our entire team. And our team is our staff, it's our volunteers, it's the advisors, it's our board members, it's our science advisors, it's our scientific partners. This has been an incredible movement that we are building together and will continue to grow for the next 10 years and far beyond that. So in this next 10 years, hold on, because it's going to be a fun ride. We're going to learn incredible things about our planet, how to make our species more sustainable, and how to create new tools so that we can live in better balance with this planet. So thank you all again. I'm at Greg at adventurescientist.org if you have any questions, and just so much love to all of you. Thank you so much.